Standard internet time. So being at 6 o'clock, we'll call this meeting to order. Number two item on, I guess since we're doing this digitally still, we'll need to do a roll call. Brian, do you want to take this segment, please?
This is Brian. Happy to, Anthony. So this is Brian Yates with Schwartz, Page and Harding, and welcome everybody to the Montgomery County MUD number 47 Board of Directors meeting for Thursday, August the 17th, 2021. As in prior meetings, I'll briefly go through our remote meeting procedures and then perform a roll call. So to begin with, need to remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded as required by the Texas Open Meetings Act. Second, please remember to state your name before you speak, including the making of any motions. When you're not speaking, please be sure to mute your line. Third, we'll continue the practice of having a roll call to vote on each motion. After a motion has been made and seconded, please wait until you hear your name called and then respond with a verbal aye, a nay, or an abstention. Finally, we need to identify each person who's joining the meeting remotely this evening so that we can accurately reflect the attendance in the minutes of the meeting. I'll perform a roll call for the board members, followed by staff and consultants. When you hear your name or your company called, please respond by indicating that you're present in the meeting. Likewise, if you need to leave the meeting before it adjourns, please announce that you're doing so before you disconnect. Once I've completed the roll call for directors, staff, and consultants, I'll ask for any members of the public to identify themselves for the record. Starting with the roll call for our board of directors, Anthony Cardell.
Here.
Paul Brown.
Here.
Laura Norton.
Here.
Cynthia Ullman.
Here.
Jennifer Ronk.
Here.
Okay, we do have a full quorum of our board present, so we will move on to the roll call for Woodlands Water staff. Jim Stinson.
Present.
Mike Mooney.
Here.
Maureen Bourgeois.
Here.
Shelley Lawson Kennedy.
Here.
Jeannie Scott.
Here.
Anyone else from Woodlands Water in the meeting? If not, we'll move on to Sandy Center River Authority staff. Ron Kelling.
Present.
Ed Shackelford. I don't hear Ed in the meeting. Is Chris Meeks in the meeting?
Chris is here. I do not see Ed as well.
Okay, anyone else from the River Authority in the meeting this evening?
I do not see anyone else.
Okay, we'll move on then to MUD 47 consultants. Do we have MUD 47 consultants in the meeting this evening?
Yes, Donnie Reed with LJA Engineering.
John Grounds with LJA.
Okay, this is Brian. Any other LJA representatives?
No, this is Donnie. No, there isn't.
Okay, do we have a representative from Baird in the meeting? The district's financial advisor?
Adam Cohen is on.
Okay. Any other district consultants in the meeting? If not, we will move on to members of the public. Do we have members of the public present in the meeting? We need to identify you for the record as well. If you could identify yourselves one at a time, please.
Roland Johnson, MUD 67.
This is Mark Unlin.
This is Brian. Any other members of the public present? Do we have someone join the meeting?
Yes, Arthur just joined.
Okay. So Arthur Bredehoff, member of the public and resident of MUD 47.
We're here.
Are you in the meeting?
We're in the meeting. Just got in.
Anyone else? Maureen, does that appear to cover everyone who is logged in?
That covers everyone.
Okay, that will complete the roll call. Anthony, I'll turn it back over to you to begin the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. We'll move on to item number 2, receive comments from the public. Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak?
This is Mark Unlin.
Okay, Mark, go ahead.
Thank you. I have two things to comment on. Last month, the MUD 67 drainage project came up for a decision, and y'all were asked to provide $2.68 million of funding, which is the second largest amount of funding for that project. But through the discussion, it seemed like most of y'all were uncomfortable with the amount of information that was provided to support that decision. And I urge you to not spend money, MUD 47 money, unless you're comfortable. That would mean that the objective is provided, the cost and the benefits and the justification is clear and supported by the residents, and the execution plan is sufficient to ensure that you can accomplish the objectives within the cost. It's okay to say no until you're convinced and comfortable. Second, on item 16, I think, of this agenda is a project to move two poles that are outside of MUD 47. And I urge you to not approve the movement of those poles or the funding of that. Those poles didn't arrive there by accident. This was a pretty significant effort. We had a committee studying this effort, this project. They did a very rigorous analysis. We also had a third-party review of the project. The project was communicated transparently to the residents about the project. Everything was installed per the plan that was approved, and it's operating fine. So it doesn't appear that's a project problem. It's more of a local issue with aesthetics that seems to be best negotiated and funded by the local MUD because those are the residents that would be affected. Just like the MUD 67 drainage project, only those affected are funding it. So this should flow the same way. We should not be a MUD 47 project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Is there anyone else from the public that'd like to speak tonight?
President
Anthony,
Anthony,
this Roland Johnson. I'd also like to speak to the Bear Branch Improvement Project. Would this be the appropriate time? Do you want to wait until it comes up on the agenda?
I think now's okay. And Arthur, I hear you, so I'll make sure that you have the opportunity afterwards.
thank you,
Roland,
Anthony.
go ahead, please.
Okay, thanks. As many of you know, I'm president of MUD 67, and I thank you for the opportunity to comment on the Bear Branch Improvement Project this evening. As you know, MUD 67 has taken the lead in securing interest-free funding from the Texas Water Development Board. Our board is committed to 50% of the project cost, but we need help. That's why I'm here asking for your support. As Stuart Schroeder has pointed out in his letter that appears in the packet, drainage and flooding from extreme events has been going on for some 20 years, and it's only gotten worse and more frequent over this time. This project is first and foremost about drainage and mitigating flood damage to public and private property, but it's also about public safety as to how flooding impacts mobility and therefore restricts police and fire first responders when Research Forest is closed due to high water. And this affects more than just the residents of MUD 67. Jim and his team have put in a lot of hard work finding a solution to this longstanding problem. The initial proposal that we have from LJ Engineering shows much promise in significantly reducing peak water levels during an extreme event. But without the support of partners in this project, we're faced with repeated flooding with each extreme event. I hope that we can count on your financial support so we can move forward with the Bear Branch project. I thank you for your time and consideration. I know you have questions, but I know that Jim and Donnie will be able to answer your questions just as they have for our MUD 67 board. And again, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Roland. Arthur, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. I'm here tonight to speak on behalf of Bear Branch Drainage Project, an application that was put forward in 2020 before the Texas Water Development Board. I'm still supportive of the project, but in reading the application that was before the Texas Water Development Board, it answered some questions, but also left some other items open for question, and I hope maybe the board can clarify it tonight. So first of all, the application shows clearly that there's a 10.1 million loan, a 30-year loan at zero interest, and a grant that was 1.3 million. So the application for construction, and this is a category 2 project, which is planning, acquisition, design, and construction and rehabilitation. I think the project's long overdue. I think the project has tremendous benefit for our community and the residents within that area, and also for MUD 47. According to the application, the project at 11.3 million, if we can stay within that cost, will contribute to the floodplain value in excess of $172 million. With any financial analyst should indicate that that's a pretty good investment for the residents. There is a project timeline. I know some directors have asked for a timeline. The application definitely has a timeline, and trust that that timeline would be shared with the directors so they can broaden their knowledge of what the project is. But I have concerns when we're asked for $2.7 million of current MUD 47 taxpayer money, and when the applicant MUD 67, and I applaud Roland for being here tonight and making a pitch for the project, I think the application should go back. The board should consider asking the Texas Water Development Board to revise the application, add all 5 MUDs in there so that the taxpayers can have equity of all the taxpayers in the 5 MUDs can take advantage of the zero interest loan over 30 years. But I'm still supportive of the project because I think the project's long overdue, and this is definitely drainage and flood mitigation. The second item I like to talk about tonight, we had a presentation last month by our partner SJRA on the Bear Branch Dam. I would propose that the 5 MUDs that are involved in this in the dam have a meeting and send one representative of each MUD to a meeting and sit down with SJRA and our executive director, Mr. Jim Stenson, and work out an action plan, a fairly immediate action plan to resolve the issues at the dam. President Anthony, I appreciate the time, and whatever time I have back, I yield back to the board.
All right, thank you very much, Arthur. Is there any other member of the public that would like to speak? Okay, so not hearing any further members of the public, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Is there anyone that wanted to move an item out of the consent agenda?
How about number 5? Ms. Paul Brown.
Okay, so Paul, you want to move item 5 out of the consent agenda, but everything else is okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd like to get a motion, I guess, for items 4, 6, and 7 to approve as part of our consent agenda.
Make a motion that we approve the other consent agenda items.
I'll second that.
Okay. Hearing a motion and a second, we'll do the roll call. Paul, how do you vote?
Aye.
Laura?
Aye.
Jennifer?
Aye.
And Cynthia?
Aye.
Okay. I'll vote aye, so motion carries. And we'll move on to item number 5, review and act on the financial reports and disbursements of July 2021. Paul, go ahead with your question.
Yeah. When I was looking at revenue, and we've pretty much completed our change out of meters. And I was trying to understand what impact, or if we've started a project or we have insight into what the value of the meter change is looking like. I presume we're monitoring and comparing from the first mud that was installed and through to, I know we just recently were installed in the last, I don't know, 4 weeks or so. And I wondered if Maureen, we had any answers on that.
This is Maureen, not at this time. Mud 47 still has quite a portion left remaining that should be done in September.
So have we examined any of the revenue streams from the other muds or not? Not yet?
Not at this time, no. I don't
Okay.
believe that we have enough data at this time.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, well, I move that we pass that consent agenda item. Can we do that?
Anthony, you're muted.
Yes, we can go ahead and pass that. Do I hear a second?
I'll second
it.
All right. So motion second. Paul, how do you vote?
Aye.
Laura?
Aye.
Jennifer?
Aye.
Cynthia?
Aye.
Vote aye. Motion carries. We'll move on to item number 9. Adopt resolution casting votes for the MCAD Special Districts candidate to be placed on a countywide ballot for the Board of Directors of the Montgomery Central Appraisal District. Or, am I looking at
You're looking at the
minutes
last
here?
one. Yeah. Item 6 is a tax collect, no.
It's, yeah, so we're on
Item
now.
8.
So while you pull up, the regular agenda item is receive financial advisor's recommendation concerning district proposed 21 tax rate, determine intended rate, and authorize the notice and the means of providing it. So.
Okay. This is Adam Cohen with Baird. Good evening. You should have a memo in your packets with the Baird logo at the top right-hand corner. And just to remind you, as I do every year, this is a 2-step process. So today, all you're doing is authorizing publication of the total tax rate. Next month, you'll hold your hearing and adopt and levy that tax rate and break it out between your maintenance and operations and debt service tax rates. Keeping in mind that you want to publish the highest rate you'll consider, because you can always come down from that next month. You can't go up without republishing. And then the only other thing I'll mention before I get into the memo is due to Senate Bill 2, as you recall last year, there's a designation to your district as a developed district, a developing district, or a low tax rate district. You don't currently qualify for a low tax rate district. So you're either a developing or developed district. And in talking with staff, it's our understanding that you'll still be determined as a developing district. Why that's important, just to remind you, is a developing district functions the way districts always have functioned with respect to tax rate. If your average homestead goes above 8%, then you are subject to a rollback election if petitioned by the residents, a certain portion of the residents of the district. If you are a developed district, that limitation is 3.5%. And if you exceed that, it's a mandatory rollback election. There's a table that we provide where I'll reference it so that year over year you can continue to monitor it. But I'll run through the report really quickly, and then feel free to stop me with any questions along the way. So your 2021 certified value as of January 1 came in at 2.3 billion. And that is up from last year's 2.27 billion. It's about a 1.32% increase. Last year, if you recall, you levied a 13-cent debt service tax rate. If you look at the second page, Last year there was a shortfall, or not a shortfall, a fall off in your overall debt profile. So this year, if you look in that center column, you only need 11 1/4 pennies, not the 13 that you needed last year. And then I'll point out to the right, your debt service coverage. The TCEQ requires we maintain a minimum of 25% coverage of your following year's debt service, so you're good there. Majority of the most informative information is in the boxes below. You can see in that first box, it's with respect to your maintenance and operations tax rate. Last year, you levied 11.5 cents. This year, we're recommending publication of 8 cents for maintenance and operations. The parity rate, in order to raise the same number of dollars that you raised last year, you would need to levy just under 11.5 cents. And you currently need about 6.5 cents to balance your current budget. The value of a penny in your district is just over $227,000. Now, where Senate Bill 2 comes into play is that middle box. Last year, your average homestead was $297,820, meaning that your residents paid the MUD tax of around $730. This year, that average homestead went up to $299,847. And so with our recommendation of a publication of 19 1/4 pennies, that tax bill would be $577, a decrease of just under 21%, or a $153 decrease from last year. Last year, you published 24.5 cents. Our recommendation would be to consider publishing 19 1/4 pennies, or a 5 1/4 penny decrease this year. And I'll pause there to answer any questions.
Out of curiosity, if we were considered a developed district, would we be able to give the 65 and older cap to our seniors?
Yeah, so that if you look in that middle box, that decrease of 20.89%, if you are deemed a developed district, if that negative 20.89 ever goes above 3.5% as a developed district, you'd be subject to a rollback election, a mandatory rollback election. But you're negative right now. With respect to over 65 exemptions, you typically do that at the beginning of the year. So you can consider that, but it would be for next tax year. And that would be in January, February of next year.
What is it now? We give a abatement of some sort to 65 and older, right? But it's not a cap, so to speak. It's a, what is the word for it? It's
$50,000
$50,000
appraised value, like a waiver, right?
Okay,
So
yeah.
if their house is 250,000, they're only taxed on 200.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question
Brian, that's
about,
also on top of the residential homestead exemption. So they are able to stack those exemptions over 65, just to be clear.
Thanks.
I have a question about the becoming a developed district. So in our packet this month, we are putting our our paperwork in saying that we're not developed. But if we were a developed district, would we be able to have that change in our tax return this year, right? Like if we needed to increase more than 3.5%.
Correct. If you're a developed district, anytime you go above, once you're deemed developed, and you could always go back to developing if you annex property or if you move forward with some sort of development. But once you are a developed district, if your average tax bill goes up more than 3.5%, it's a mandatory rollback election to your residents of your district.
Right. Adam, I forgot to forewarn you. I know enough about this probably to be considered the most dangerous board member within the MUDs, all the MUDs, because I used to do this. So I'm very familiar with this. And it concerns me because of that potential that we cannot control our own tax rate in the future, and that we're limited to 3.5%. We have potentially something going on with a dam to protect our neighborhood. We're right on the cusp of becoming a developed neighborhood. What is there preventing us from doing a tax rate, an M&O tax rate of, say, the same 11.5%, and then transferring some of our fund balance to the debt service fund and bringing that INS rate down?
You can absolutely do that. I mean, you have the ability to do that. And, for now, if you don't continue to develop and you just appreciate year over year, then, even as a developed district, the way, I mean, obviously, but for the other board members, when it comes to the rollback election, and Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but I have not seen it yet. I know we're coming very close to it happening. When you go to a rollback election, the only thing that can be rolled back is your maintenance and operations tax rate. Your debt service tax rate is an obligation to the outstanding principal and interest on the bond, so that can never be rolled back. So the likelihood of you going above 3.5% increase with just appreciation is minimal, but there will come a time where a developed district may exceed that 3.5%. They're going to have to hold a rollback election and pay that $15,000 to $25,000, and it's meaningless. There's been no carve out yet for something like that to happen, and we're seeing it more and more becoming an issue.
Right, and we're limited in what, how many more bonds we can issue.
Right.
This is Brian. So, Anthony, I think what I'm understanding your suggestion or question line of thinking being is that right now we have a recommendation on the debt service side to lower that debt service from 13 cents down to 11.25, and to keep that coverage rate over the minimum of the 25. And you see we're kind of inching kind of close to it in the first couple of years, and then it starts to spread out a little bit. So the idea you're tinkering with, it sounds like, is to possibly under levy on the debt service side below the recommendation and over levy on the M&O side, and just do a debt service transfer from your operations to your debt service to keep the M&O rate higher, so that it gives you more of a higher base starting point if we become subject to the 3.5%.
Right. I'm just trying to make sure we're not tying our hands if we need to spend, money on dam repairs and then we can't.
Well, I kind of agree with that. There's dam repairs and who knows what other repairs. But this is a big decrease, really.
Yeah, if I had more flexibility in the future, I'd be more than happy to just, decrease them, even though when you raise them in the future, it's always unpopular, right? But it would make sense you got to do what you have to do, and you don't want to take more property tax than what you have to, right? But it just, for me, it makes more sense and keeps us more flexible in being able to run this optimally if we use that philosophy.
Maureen, I haven't memorized the numbers, but do you remember what the end of year next is for reserve? Was it about 10 million?
We have budgeted about 5.5 for the end of next year.
End of next year, okay.
Yeah. That's about 10 months averaging.
10, that's right. That's what I had in my mind, 10 months, right.
Yeah. So, Anthony, just for frame of reference, if you were to publish a flat tax rate, it looks like you as a district would show a 0.868% increase. So you're still well below 3.5%. So, if you want to look at publishing, a smaller decrease, you can absolutely do that. And then determine what you would like to drop the tax rate to, if any, at your next meeting.
Yeah, this is Brian. So I think when this budget was put together, it was looked at as far as what your projected surplus would be as a result. Plus, you've got a one-time capital expense outlay of 244, and you still have the 119 surplus with the $5.5 million operating budget surplus after that. So I think the district is certainly in a position financially to be able to consider publication of this total tax rate. If you want to go higher in the publication, you certainly can. But I think staff and consultants were comfortable that the district could certainly manage this as the overall tax rate. I think Anthony's point is a very interesting one about the issue with ultimately transitioning to a developed district status. It's hard to say when that will ultimately happen for this district. You do have a few tracks that still are yet to be developed and have infrastructure for that. But that being said, you could have the same ultimate total tax rate, but tinker with what your debt service versus M&O is, and perhaps under levy on the debt service, as long as you have a budget line item in your operating budget to transfer that amount that you're under levying on the debt service side and moving over to M&O, to have that as a line item on your budget to move that into your debt service account so that you are able to not fall below that coverage. And by that kind of technical maneuver, for lack of a better term, you give yourself a little bit more wiggle room on your M&O rate as your baseline for whether you're subject to an 8% or 3.5%. If for some reason you need to go above parity in the future.
What is the just stepping back to the prior conversation on the Bear Branch or Research Forest project? What's the upper limit on that expense? Worst case price on that expense? Is it 15 million? How much of that could move for all the participants?
I don't think we know how bad it could get.
Well, I don't think it's a question of how bad it could get. It's a question of, from my standpoint, what, we don't know what that, ultimately, no one's articulated an exact number for that expense, right? Frankly, I personally would feel better with a higher rate rather than this rate.
Well, we can keep the same rate, right? And just do this, what did we call it? A technical maneuver, right?
Anthony, you're still on mute.
Sorry about that. I don't know if we can do the same rate because of the increase in value.
Well, I meant the 19,
right?
Whatever.
I mean, I would be a lot more comfortable with the parity M&O rate, so that we're going to go for the same amount that we received last year. I haven't, I'm sure we've all been paying attention to the news. I haven't seen that anything is getting cheaper, right? And we did have some non-routine expenses this year and meters and whatnot, but we have too much unknown in the future. So that would make me more comfortable if we go with parity for now, and then we can fine tune that number as we get better budget numbers.
I mean, I'll say if you want to publish a decrease in tax rate, if you publish 24 cents where you're currently at 24.5, that would be a 1.37% decrease in the publication.
This is Brian. So basically, if you ultimately go lower and you expect to go lower, then you just won't get credit for that in your publication. You could, of course, do a press release or whatever informational outreach to residents after you actually adopt. It just wouldn't show up in the newspaper in your notice.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, we've gone over 10 years with the same rate, right?
Yeah, I'm just more comfortable with sticking with, and I think that it would be just a little bit of a decrease since we're going to adjust our INS rate down. Adam, didn't you say that we're bringing our INS rate down?
Yes, you would go from 13. You need currently 13 last year, 11.25 this year. So however you want to structure, if you want to make transfers on a yearly basis, we can adjust for that. But if you wanted to take a portion from the debt service decrease to overall decrease the tax rate and then transfer some of those, the remaining, 3/4 of a penny or so, or a penny, or however you want to do it, to M&O, you can do that.
Just bring out my.
You went back on mute.
Struggling with my mute button today. I just needed to bring out my calculator here. But
You went mute again, Anthony.
okay, so we're going from 0.13 to 0.1125 for our debt, right? Our
Right.
INS. Okay, so and then you're proposing a 0.08 for M&O, but if we stay at parity, we're still going to be decreasing our tax rate either way.
Absolutely.
Right.
Or you can, like I said, you can, rather than completely decrease your tax rate, if you're more comfortable with shifting a few of those pennies over to your M&O rate, and then whatever you want to lower it, you lower it from debt service, you can do that as well. If you're not comfortable going down, almost 2 pennies.
Right. Yeah, I'm not comfortable going all the way down to 2 pennies. That's, I guess, what I'm trying to say here is I'd like the idea of the parity rate of 0.1350 and then the INS rate of 0.1125. And then if that doesn't work, then we can lower the INS and make a transfer as needed.
Okay.
Well,
What else? Go
I
ahead,
was
Laura.
excited about 19.25 as our tax rate. We have been at 24 for a long time. And we've got our 10 months operating reserve. I think we're conservative with, page 19 in our packet. Look at the years 2023, our debt service coverage really goes up. So my opinion is we're being too conservative, and I like the 19.25.
I guess my question is, we've talked about the concern about when we become a developed district. So what has to happen? What are the metrics around when we make that move?
This is Brian. It's based on the metric of when you have infrastructure in place to serve 95% of your ultimate projected build out. So it's infrastructure development based. And so right now, I'm guessing part of that has to do with your remaining undeveloped property in the district. I'm not sure what other potential redevelopment may be taken into account there. LJ and Donnie's group prepares that certificate for the developing versus developed district status. So Donnie, I don't know if you have any more background information on how y'all made that calculation for this year and how close they are to crossing that 95% threshold.
I don't, it was just straight numbers on what's developed and what's not. And I mean, I could look at it and let you have I could look at it a little more detailed though, let you know when I could project that.
Okay, I'm just trying to get a feel. Are we at 94% or are we at 75% or, you know, what are we looking at here?
Oh, this Donnie, you're way closer to 95% than 75. I mean, y'all are you're pretty close.
And Anthony, just so you know, if you were to do the parity rate at 0.1135 and the debt service tax rate at 11 1/4, that would be 22.6 cents. It would still reflect a 7.13% decrease in the overall tax bill, or the equivalent of $52 decrease in the overall tax bill.
Right. Yeah. I think we're going to be able to go down on our property tax rate overall. Question is how much, right? Because we can't come back up once we make that decision. Yeah, and we spent a lot of time last year passing the fund balance policy, but I thought our district goal was a 12-month reserve, not 10-month.
I thought it was 9.
So perhaps we should bring that out for the next month. I think that we've kind of beat this up already enough to say that we can still bring down our tax rate a little bit. And if we can, we'll bring it down further, as long as we're not tying our hands behind our back in the future.
So what's the number we're going to publish?
It sounds like 22.6 cents. The parity rate is 11.35 for maintenance and operations, and then a debt service tax rate of 11 1/4.
That's what I would like. You know, this is a group decision here. So we're just supposed to receive the recommendation. Do we need to take action on this, Brian?
This is Brian. You do need to take action to authorize publication of the district's intent to levy a overall tax rate. You don't have to give a split, but an overall tax rate not to exceed whatever rate that you won't go over at your board meeting next month. So you would want to go with the highest rate that a majority of the board is comfortable with. And I did pull up the reserve criteria resolution, and that is 6 months of operating plus 3 months of an emergency reserve. So a total of 9. And y'all's average at the end of next year, based on the budget that was presented, was 9.4.
Okay. Well, very good. All right. So I guess we'd like to go with 22.6% for now. That's my proposal, and you know, we can fine tune that for next month. So I'll make that as a motion, I guess. If I could have.
I'll second that.
Okay. So Paul, I think you're required. I keep asking this. We always have, but you're usually required to vote yes if you make the motion or to second it. So Laura, how do you vote?
No.
Okay. Jennifer?
I'd like to end up with a lower number eventually, but I'm going to say yes to publishing this so that we can talk about it more next month.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer. And Cynthia?
Yes.
Okay. So motion carries, and we'll move on to item number 9. Reviewed the draft fiscal year 21-22 operating budget and recommended water rate structure.
Thank you, Anthony. We are, again, just talking on a preliminary basis tonight. This is the beginning discussion of your budget. So I'll hit a couple of highlights, and then open it up for discussion tonight and tweak it over the next 30 days to bring it back to you next month. We're projecting revenues of about $10 million. This budget expenditures of about 9.9. And of course, if with a changing your tax rate, the revenue will go up about $230,000 for every penny that you keep in the M&O tax rate. So just keep that in mind. We are recommending that you revise your retail sewer rate in January to reflect the increase that the San Jacinto River Authority wholesale rate is going up. You're now at $4.65 per thousand. The wholesale rate will be $4.85. So we recommend, and we prepared the budget based on passing on that increase to your customers in January to $4.85 per thousand. And with that, I'll open it up to your questions.
Doesn't sound like we have any questions yet, or at least not tonight. Anyone? Questions?
No, thank you.
I guess I have the same question I have earlier. Is we did a multi-million-dollar project to change out meters with the expectation that, or I believe we had an expectation and probably justified based upon an increase in revenue, decrease in expenses, increase in revenue because of the efficiency of the meters. I just wondered, is that factored in, and what was, if we had that, what was it? And you don't have to answer that now, but what was it, and how's it offset in this budget? Is it customer behaviors, or is it,
So Paul, we put together a whole different fund for capital projects. So that should be removed from the equation in our operating budget, right? So if we go back to our financial reports, we've got three funds. We've got our M&O, or our operating fund. We have our debt service fund, and then we have a capital projects.
I understand that.
Okay.
Anthony, if I may, this project's actually in the special projects fund, so there's 4.
So there's no expectation that our inefficient prior meter environment would generate more revenue?
Well, wouldn't any, well,
It would
okay.
be more accurate.
That's what I'm asking. It has nothing to do with capital. It has to do with, you spent the capital, what's the return on investment? And is it reflected in your cash flow?
I look at it sort of like this core station. A core station, it'll give, the yours core station will give you a subsidence number the next time we go look at it, but we need more data. We need years of data to compare, and the more years we have, the better.
Hey, I don't know that I buy that, but that's okay. I think at least in the commercial environment, this type of an environment, you would be where you were installing and expecting a higher capture rate in terms of, your water usage. You would be expecting to see the changes almost immediately. But anyway, that's, if we don't feel like we need to monitor it that closely, that's fine with me.
Right. And I think that there's I recall that we talked about this already a little bit, because sewer is going to be a wash, right? Whatever more we get on sewer because of the meters, we're going to pay more. But for the water revenue, there is a way to predict it, because it comes through one pipe, through the SGRA pipe, say 100,000 gallons, but we only build 90,000 gallons. That means we lost 10,000. hopefully through the meters and not leaking somewhere else in the neighborhood, but we can't really tell until we put the new meters in. Maybe that's a 5% increase. Maybe that's a 2% increase and we've got a leak somewhere. Do we have that information? Jim, do you know what our billing to purchased ratio is?
Yeah, we do have that, excuse me, but community-wide, it's too early to tell what the impact the meters are having on the community. To break it out, individual MUDs is a challenge, and it's too early. We just don't have enough data. But after a couple of years, we predicted that we would see a much more billable water, which in theory could help stabilize wholesale water rates going forward if we can collect enough revenue, but that would be community-wide.
Right. Can you remind me what that difference is?
I can tell when I sprinkle the lawn and do my laundry. So I really like it, and I've seen great feedback from residents.
Yeah, and we don't have meters for everyone, even in MUD 47 yet, right? We're still finishing that build out.
That is correct.
That's fine. Push it till next year.
Okay.
Never seen a project done that way, but push it till next year.
So we're to review the budget. It doesn't look like we need to make a motion on this one. Does anyone have any further questions on the budget before we move on to item 10?
And what I would like to recommend or you consider is maybe moving on to the item. We have LJA and their staff here to make a rather detailed presentation regarding the Bear Branch. If you might want to move that agenda item up so they could make that presentation.
Okay, so you'd like to move item number 15 up to up in the agenda. I guess we can go ahead and do that. So we'll go to number, I'm sorry, which number is that? Number 16? No.
Number 15.
15.
Number 15. All right. Donnie, if you want to go ahead with your presentation.
All right, give me a second. Let me share my screen. Do I have permission?
Yes, I just gave it to you. Sorry about that.
Okay. Oops. All right, can y'all see that?
I can't. Can you guys?
Not yet. Hold on.
No,
Nope, I can't see it.
I can't see anything.
Advance.
I can see Europe.
All right, let's see. Does that work?
Yes.
Okay, you see that now?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I can see that.
Okay, there you go. Perfect. All right, so I'm here tonight to talk about the Bear Panther Branch and Research Forest Drive drainage improvements. The goals for tonight, I want to try to make this as efficient and painless as possible. But in order to do that, there's a couple of things that I want to share first. I want to do just a brief little history of the Woodlands drainage, an approach to extreme event storms, and then we'll get into the Bear Panther Branch Research Forest drainage improvements. And we'll talk about how we gather data, analysis of options, preliminary analysis, preliminary cost estimates, and then the funding sources. Woodlands drainage, and I'll try to do this first part pretty quick. Drainage was done in 1970s, and then in 1980 there was a supplemental report that we did to update that. And when design was put together, it was designed with the end in mind. What that means is the ultimate drainage was designed at the very beginning. So, sure.
I understand that Ian McCurg had a lot to do with the drainage, and that was like the Grogan's Mill look of no curb and gutter.
Yes.
When did that change and we went to the curb and gutter?
Well, and when you're looking at the big picture, we're looking at 25,000 acres of development. You know, we're not looking at that detailed at that point in time of curb and gutter or roadside ditches at that point in time. I mean, we're just looking where overall water is going to go, how big are detention ponds, what it's going to outfall into, bear, panther. Then over time, we can analyze some stuff and look at it and say, hey, do we want to increase this or do we want to change this to be roadside ditches or do curb and gutter? So there's some involvement that happens there, but that's a later on part. That's kind of a smaller item as opposed to the big picture one.
Okay, I'm just curious when this research area was designed the way it is now.
It was, well, back in the, probably back in the early 90s, I believe, all the Research Force Drive. But whether it was curb and gutter, you'd still have these same type of events that were happening across it.
You sure? Okay.
So with the end in mind, so what I was going to say with that is when the Woodlands was put together and the Woodlands Development Company hired our firm, we looked at it and said, hey, we've got 25,000 acres. How are we going to do this? Well, we studied the whole thing, put it all together, and we designed it for ultimate development. So as development started in Grogan's Mill and it worked its way north and west up Panther and into Bear Branch, I mean, those developments up there, you know, a 500-year event would come through and they would barely see any water because there was so much capacity available. So over time, that's why you hear people say, I've been here for 25, 30 years and I've never seen anything. Well, it's because back in those times, they had excess capacity. So over time, as development came, the water levels went up to the standard, the 100-year event is what it was designed to. The Woodlands basically outfalls in the Bear and Panther Branch and then ultimately outfalls into Spring Creek. The idea of the Woodlands development is kind of on the lower end of the Spring Creek channel. So it was more of, let's get all this flow into Spring Creek and down and out before the peak of Spring Creek hits. It's kind of getting that out. But with that, there are 5 small detention ponds that are utilized inside the Woodlands. Here's just a picture that kind of shows you the Woodlands. What you see in blue is the Panther, Bear, the major creeks that are going through the natural channels. The yellow are either man-made channels or natural channels that outfall into Bear, Branch, or Spring Creek. In the green, as you see here, I hope you can see my cursor.
Yes.
We have small detention ponds. We have small detention ponds, but as you see, this whole area is 25,000 acres. So, I mean, this just kind of takes off a little bit of the peaks in these areas. Here's a copy of the drainage report. And as you can look at it from 1980, you can see here's all of the Woodlands. This is where the Bear Branch Dam and Reservoir was going to go. Here's Kirkendall. As you can see, here's 1488 Panther Branch and the little trib that comes over. This would be Research Force Drive coming through here. So you can see, I mean, it was kind of built with the end, or designed with the end in mind. What we typically do in a drainage system is we have a series of channels or storm sewers that outfall into Bear Branch. The storm sewers, roadside ditches are typically designed for the smaller event, the 2-year event. That's the rain that you just, when you're driving down the road, you have a light windshield wipers going, and that's collected either in ditches or in storm sewers and goes out. When that event does get exceeded, the streets act as conveyance channels. So sometimes you'll see those pond a little bit to carry water out, but they should get the water into Bear Branch pretty quickly. So now we'll just kind of talk briefly, approach what we do after storms happen in the Woodlands. And I just kind of listed 3 that were big ones that happened. Back in 1994, there was a big water from Spring Creek that backed up. Then the more the recent ones, Tropical Storm Allison was a big event that came through that we did a bunch of analysis on as well. Then you had the Tax Day, Memorial Day in 16, followed a year later by Hurricane Harvey. All these were major events that we went through and studied. And when these events kind of come through, Jim and his staff hires us or ask us to go out and do some information, gather data to determine what type of event happened and is our system working correctly. So one of the things we do is we obtain radar data. We gather data from stream and rain gauges that we have throughout the woodlands. We go and get high water marks. So if you see leaves or grass that's brushed up on the side of the road or on channels, that kind of shows you the elevation that water got to. Well, we go out and have our surveyors shoot elevations at that point to help us understand what the event was so we can put it into our models. We also go out and talk with residents, like at these meetings, and hear what they had to say, because sometimes they say the water got up to here, and so we try to get that information and go from there. And then lastly, we look at LiDAR and topography. This is just one of the, I'm going to show you some examples of what we have. This is the radar data that we get from a company that just gathers some. I know the information is hard to see, but it basically tells you what type of events, how much rain happened in a certain area. This is an exhibit that shows the rain gauges and where it will show how much rainfall you had in a certain area over a certain time. So for instance, this rain gauge that's right up near y'all during this event, and I believe this was the Tax Day or Memorial Day, we had 6.8 inches in a 6 hour time period, and that basically calculates out to 6 hours as a 100-year event. And so we gather a bunch of data like that.
The yellow and the green on that last slide, those are all rain gauges?
Yes, ma'am. The yellow ones are rain gauges that are either by, well, these are all USGS or the National Floodplain rain gauges. The green ones were local people that lived in the area that said, here's what my rain gauge had.
Okay. Thanks.
Here is USGS. These are some stream gauges, and basically it just tells you water surface elevations that are recorded in a stream at a certain location. So for instance, in one spot up here, the elevation was 169.75 and the FEMA elevation was 172.5. Just more high water marks. When we gather that, we've got tables like this. Amount of rain that you had versus the duration, and it will give you, was it a 2-year event? Was it a 5-year event? Was it a 100-year event? Did it exceed that type of stuff? More data, all this is more than anything is just kind of letting you know how we gather information. And then once we gather all that information, we will write memos to to the water agency or to Harris County Flood Control. I don't know if you heard earlier, but Dr. John Grounds is on the phone. He's our chief hydrologist at LJA, and this is one of the memos that he did. He gathered all this information and came up, and this is basically the one that happens on Spring Creek, but it kind of showed you what happened during Hurricane Harvey, that after 15, 30, 60 minutes, 2 hours, you didn't have much of it was a lighter event, but this was just an event that just kept going and going and going. And as you get into 1 day, 2 day, 4 day, 6 day, the event went from a 5-year event to over a 500-year event on Spring Creek. And I'll let John Grounds talk a little more in detail a little bit later. So then after we get this, what we do is we go and we analyze what were the problems. We go and look, was there ponding in streets? Were homes flooded? Were there routes that weren't accessible? And so what we go and look is, were there extreme events routes? Were there pathways? Were there channels open that people needed to be open? Were fences blocking these areas? Did you have low-lying driveways that caused a problem? And then from that, we do one of two things. We either go fix that problem, because there have been spots where an extreme event route is by somebody's house and somebody has built up bushes or put fences up there, and we correct it. And so we go fix that, put it back into design standard, or we go out and actually raise the level of standard. We go do improvements. And what you see is a couple of examples here where, for instance, this one lattice gate was an extreme event channel that we went out and cleaned out and gave it a little bit more access to let water get out into the channel quicker. The one on the left is Belfour. We actually increased the capacity for the storm sewer. So we actually, the first one, or I shouldn't say the first one, on the right, the lattice gate was kind of fixing a problem, just kind of making it back to design standard. The Belfour was raising that standard, getting it a little bit better than what it was, taking it to a higher standard. And as y'all know, in Mud 46, y'all done quite a few projects, and we've done a lot of projects out in the woodlands. We had 134 reported residents reporting drainage concerns. We've had multiple projects that we've done out here. And throughout the Mud 47 and all the other muds, we spent over $2 million for projects that had water in home or water near homes, street drainage, property drainage, in excess of, we're almost going into $3 million worth of improvements that we've done. So that gives you a little history on what the woodlands drainage is and what we kind of do when we see big events. And so let's kind of get into Bear Branch. You know, after Tropical Storm, or let's go back, Tropical Storm Allison back in 2001, Tax Day, Memorial Day, and even Harvey, we had quite a bit of ponding in the Capstone area, and this is the Capstone. We got Research Forest that's up here, and this is the Capstone area, and this is where the Woodlands High School is, if you can see my cursor. So after these events, we went out and got some data, some high water marks to start our process, just like I said before. These are some more areas around the area where we got high water marks of what the water was out there. And you can see, I mean, this is the current floodplain that is mapped per FEMA. One thing I do want to point out, this is an approximation. When we went out later and did survey of this area, you'll see, and I'll show you in another slide, the map floodplain for this area. Here's Research Forest Drive, and here's the map floodplain. It is not even up to Research Forest. So if you look here, the 500 year doesn't, and this is the 500 year, the 500 year doesn't even get up to Research Forest. But if we go out and survey, we went out in the ground and surveyed what the elevations were, this 147, this 149, this 143, you can see the 100-year floodplain actually goes up into this section. It inundates Research Forest in one place, the Capstone area over here by Bear Branch Park, and even over here by the bridge going across Research. So I believe it was at the tax day flood, we had, we saw elevations that got up to, as you can see down here, got up to 146.3. And so this exhibit here, we highlighted everything that was at the elevation of 146.3 and less. And you can see here's all this area that was inundated with water after the tax day flood.
With the maps that you were showing previously, were those modeled or that was actual? Or
this is so.
I'm not.
So I may let John. I may let John describe this a little bit more in detail. But when FEMA sets floodplain maps, and this is based off of floodplain maps, they come through here and say, here's the amount of water that's coming through this area, and this is what the 100-year floodplain elevation would be at these locations. So the blue should be the high point of whatever this elevation is. I believe this is 145. So it should go out to 145. But at the time these maps were done, this might have been done in the 60s. This is the best available data that they had at the time was here. But as I was showing you before, when you go out and actually shoot the elevation, that 146, 147 elevation is well across Research Forest Drive.
And I'll just say that I appreciate this because the FEMA maps I have seen in the past have been known to be wildly inaccurate about where those elevations ought to be. So seeing a map where they've actually been shot is really helpful. So thank you for that.
You're
That
welcome.
Previous slide, with the blue, the two shades of blue, does that show that's actually where water went? Like,
No,
what-
this is the actually mapped FEMA floodplain. This is the elevations and the floodplain per the FEMA map. So we basically took this aerial exhibit of the woodlands and overlaid the FEMA boundary on it. So, and
Let
that's what
me
I'm saying.
put a different way. That's where the federal government estimated the high water marks would be.
which is the darker blue.
That's
For the
right.
100-year, yes.
Okay, I'm getting a time here to look at your legend. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, so what you have in the middle is you have the floodway, and then the darker, the little bit lesser, well, the dark blue is the floodway, the less darker is the 100-year, and then the really light is the 500-year. Per the FEMA, the federal government, this is what they said. And so they set these elevations based upon models that they do. And then they came out and drew these elevations based upon the best available data they had at the time. And as you can see now, we have data that shows this much more accurate. This is actually where that would be. I've got this. So this is something that I showed a while back. I believe the MUD 67, but this is an exhibit. So we said the inundation, the water for tax day got up to 146.3. This is a kind of a rough exhibit that shows water starting from 0 and going up to 146.3. As you can see, it's not a model. It's not a full model that goes through it. This is more just a graphical representation, but you can see where the water goes and how it gets into the streets and how it gets, and here's the high school, how it gets to the high school and how it starts going up these channels and starts going into into lots and across research in different locations.
Looks good. Great.
So Jim had hired a firm before, and they came out and did a 2D model that is more of a detailed representation based upon actually the elevations and all the stuff that we talked about earlier, but it basically shows this same type of drawing. So we can show that if we need to in a later time. I just didn't have a copy of it.
And the point there is we wanted to make sure what was happening was accurate. So we hired actually 2 drainage professionals to run 2 different scenarios, and they both jive.
Right. So one of the things that we looked at is then we said, okay, I guess going back to this, we said, hey, well, MUD 67 came over and said, we've got a problem. We've got a lot of area in the Capstone area that's going underwater and it's causing problems. And we can also see that it came across, research and did that. So MUD 67 said, hey, what can we do? So we came over and we looked at different options, and we looked at increasing the capacity, detention capacity of Lake Woodlands. Well, it's too far downstream to have any impact. We looked at it. I mean, by the time it gets downstream to the Lake Woodlands, it's not going to have any impact. Another one that we wanted to look at was upstream, increasing Bear Branch Reservoir detention. But the detention that's held upstream, by the time that water would get down to where we are at research and at the high school, it's a negligible effect. You're going to have maybe a couple of tenths of relief. It really didn't make any, according to our models, it didn't make any sense to do that. So what we looked at was, since this is all going into Bear Branch and Bear Branch, Panther Branch, let's see what we can do to increase the capacity or increase the levels in Bear Branch. What we looked at was getting the water through Bear Branch quicker, because if you go back and look at this, Bear Branch, here's Bear Branch. This whole area is Bear Branch. So water comes down and then it kind of hits this area and it just kind of spreads out here. It kind of slows down, it's going through the trees and it kind of slows, has no place to really go. So what we looked at is, hey, what can we do along our channel to clear it out, excavate it out a little bit to maybe make this water go through quicker, and it will lower this water surface elevation. So that's what we're doing. We're trying to increase the flow to get the water downstream. But if you increase the flow, that means you're going to be putting more water on people downstream of Gosling Road, down that area. So that's what we came up. We got to do some type of detention to mitigate that once we get past this one area. Other issues that came up that we looked at was environmental. We have to mitigate environmental wetlands issues with erosion control or other maintenance that we've seen or that we've talked with the Corps about. And what we kind of looked at, the final thing is doing some clearing and some understoring, but trying to minimize that as much as possible because, I mean, what makes the woodlands is the trees and the underbrush. Wanted to kind of show this because this is stuff that we looked at back in 2001 for Tropical Storm Allison. When Tropical Storm Allison came through, we looked at these similar type of things. Hey, could we go through and clear this whole channel or fix up this whole channel? Being here's 1488 up here at the very top, 2978 over here. Could we do some improvements to this channel, come all the way through Lake Woodlands, all the way down to Spring Creek? We came up with an idea that we could do that. We came up with a very similar type of approach back in 2001 for what we're looking at right now. Here's one, just another variation, 3 variations that we had of the same thing before. So ultimately what we came up with is we said, hey, if we can clear out Panther Branch and we can clear out Bear Branch in this region through here with a widening out the pilot channel, deepening it a little bit and doing some understory clearing, basically making the water that comes here move faster downstream, it will lower your water surface elevations. And this is based on a tropical storm and a tax day or Memorial Day / Harvey, because they were all about the same, that in this capstone area, we'd be reducing water surface elevation by about 3 feet. At the high school going into this Twinberry Catch Cradle intersection, we're reducing it about 2.5 feet. When you get over here to Bear Branch Park, we're reducing the water from about 2.5 feet. These are all based upon the event that happened on Tax Day, Memorial Day, Harvey, because they're roughly about the same. This is a typical cross section, and I'll blow this up a little bit. But as I was saying before, the Bear Branch channel, when you talk about it, it's all the way from this point all the way across. This is probably 200 feet that's across. This here is just the pilot channel that's running down the middle. So when we're talking about it, Bear Branch is here, but this is that little channel that's running down the middle of it. We're talking about widening it up a little bit. So this kind of makes it a little bit better to see. As you can see, this is the natural ground of Bear Branch. Coming right through here. What we're looking at doing is widening this out to 40 feet wide, doing a 5-to-1 side slope. So you'd be removing this area, and digging a little bit deeper pilot channel to allow that water to move faster down the channel.
Let me, a 5-to-1 slope looks nothing like this diagram here. A 5-to-1 slope is relatively flat. This is exacerbated because of the scale it is.
Right.
So please understand 5-to-1 is something you could easily mow with a lawnmower.
Yeah, I mean, and 5-to-1 means you're going 5 feet and then up 1 feet. So if you just think, a person's about, 5-6 feet tall, and then you're going up 1 foot on top of that. So it really, as Jim is saying, it's laid back pretty good. So as you can see, here's kind of this is just a rough illustration. Here's what you've got for Bear Branch. It's got trees, it's got underbrush, it's got stuff in it. You've got the natural channel that's here right now. Obviously, this is exaggerated a little bit. And then what we'd be doing is clearing out this channel a little bit more and doing some type of underbrushing to allow water to pass through the channel more. Just to kind of go back, when we model these channels at the very beginning, we take into account that there will be this type of vegetation and this type of blockage in a channel. So when we model it, we take this into account. If this area gets removed, that water's moving through a lot faster and will lower the water surface elevation. And there's just another example of what it would possibly look like. And so I kind of gave one, is once again, it's an extreme condition, kind of looks like this. It would go to something more like this. If we do this type of clearing, and what we've always kind of called it is linear park type of clearing, that you could come out here and throw a Frisbee around through that. The other thing that came up that was the moving in the final part of it is the.
So have we
Sure.
looked change costs?
Pardon me?
I was just wondering if we've looked at how those kinds of changes are going to impact O&M costs long-term.
No, we have not looked at that as in long term. I know that right now the SGRA has a plan right now that they do some clearing every five or so years, doing desilting and desnagging along the way. I know downstream further in Mud 46, as we get closer to Spring Creek, there's some clearing in there. It can't be, we're not going to be, it can't be that much.
Jennifer, if they do mowing 3 or 4 times a year, this would just increase the area that they would typically mow.
Okay, and that's what I thought. I just wondered if it would be a significant difference or if it's just a little bit more than what they're doing now.
It would be a little bit more, but I can't see it being that much more. The cost, we basically put numbers in and came up with for modeling, environmental design, cost, wetlands impact, we came up with a number of $11.3 million is what we had asked for in the grant. I feel pretty confident in that number, pretty comfortable in that. I know I've heard some people say there's other numbers of going up to 14 or 18 million, and I don't know where those numbers come from, because what we put together in our grant application to the Water Development Board was 11.3. And we did put some, inflation cost of what would be going into it. But I can't see, us getting much more than, I can't see it being more than 11.3 million. Just another picture of kind of showing what we've got. We've got the improvements of the channel coming down Panther, improvements of the channel coming down Bear. We put in a couple of locations for detention ponds. These aren't exact right now. These are based upon the old models that we did back in the 80s, that we said, hey, if we do this type of clearing, we do this type of improvement, that we're going to increase the flow. So we have to mitigate it, which means slow it down before it goes downstream, or otherwise this extra flow is going to come and impact people downstream. So we have put in rough locations of where detention ponds going to be. Yes, they could be smaller. They could be a little bit bigger. Can we add things to them? Can we put in, walking trails through them? I mean, there's all sorts of things that we need to look at going forward. But we need to put this together initially for the grant application. So where do we stand now? Jim wanted me to, present this to y'all. If this project does move forward and we say, let's go, the first thing we have to do is we have to do detailed drainage models. The models that we had were done in the 1980s. They were based upon criteria and used models that were available back then. Those models are still recognized, but they're not used for approval by any of the agencies, Montgomery County, FEMA, any of the floodplain administrators. So we would have to use new models to get better data, and it's the right thing to do. Then we need to go to the Corps. We've already talked with the Corps before about this project of what we're trying to do. The Corps was on board with it. They said, hey, we don't see any problem with what you're doing, but it was still verbal. We need to go get the permitting process going with them. Next step would then be construction plans to put things together. Then we would, talk with the residents and work with the Woodlands Water Agency to see how we need to do this. Do we need to add some water features to it? Do we need to do trails, paths, planning, landscaping? There's all sorts of things that we could, that we could do in it. And then from there, once that's ready to go, we can move into construction and get this done. That about wraps it up. I always like to put this drawing in when I'm talking about drainage. It just kind of shows you that the area that's in gray is the entire watershed for Spring Creek. It's 246,000 acres. The Woodlands is 25,000. So the Woodlands is 10% of the entire drainage area. And so when we talk about, hey, let's put in a little bit of detention in this big area, it's really not going to have any impact, is what we're looking at. So, but that's just one that really has, that's just an extra little exhibit I always like to put in there to kind of show the woodlands in relation to Spring Creek. That's all I have. I do have John Grounds available here as well. He is a PhD with our company and has access. If we have any technical questions, he will be the one that can answer any technical questions you have. He is well versed in the different type of models, how to talk with FEMA. He works a lot with Harris County Flood Control and Montgomery County. So if there's any questions that you have for John, or if John, you'd like to chime in on anything that I might have missed, that's all I have.
You've done a great job so far. Let's go.
Great job, Donnie. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to start off on the grant amount. As I understand it, the grant is limited to 10% of the loan amount. And since the loan amount is 5 million, the grant amount is 500,000. Is that right?
No, the grant amount, so we got a total of 11.3 million. So the grant amount is roughly 1 million and the loan amount is 10 million, just in ballpark numbers. I mean, it's
the grant amount again is what? How much?
The grant amount is 10%. So it's 1.13 million.
It's 10% of the whole project cost, not just the loan amount.
No,
correct.
This is Brian. No, I think we had run that down. What Donnie's referring to is what we were approved for through the Water Development Board by MUD 67. MUD 67 has said that they wanted at least a 50% cost share from whatever combination of other participants were willing to share. So in that cost. And so that would reduce the amount of the loan because it looks like the township is not, that option is not turning out to be viable through Jim's additional discussions with them. So we're back to the MUD options, and we talked about all that last month. So with the MUDs contributing roughly half of the cost with 67, the loan amount would be for 5 million and change, and the amount of the grant based on a $5+ million loan would be reduced to around 500,000 or so. So in that regard, Laura, you are correct on what's being proposed, not what was originally rewarded or awarded by Water Development Board, which is what Donnie's referring to.
Okay. My thing on this is I've been a long time advocate. I think we've been talking about this for 4 years. But now we are looking at potential incorporation. I've been going to those incorporation meetings, and what that would do for us is on the funding of this project, spread it out more, where MUD 47 doesn't have homes that are victim to this that I know of. It's a mobility issue for us. We want our.
No, I believe we also have some homes.
Okay, mostly it's a mobility issue. I'll keep it at that. And as a mobility issue, it's not as great a risk for our constituents. And what I'd like to see, because I know that the Montgomery County Engineering Department has known that research forest floods and is impassable, and it has for all those flood events that you showed. But the county, who is in charge of our roads, as we sit here in a special district, has done nothing for the past 2 decades. But I believe that the township, upon incorporation, has the taxing authority over all of the woodlands to spread the cost of this. And what are we looking at but a year from now? So that's why I have changed my tune, and I'm for waiting for a year, because I think MUD 47's contribution to this is quite a bite.
Well,
this is Brian. So understand the point, Laura. I think just want to make sure that you and the rest of the board are clear on the ramifications of if we don't move forward with the project. The District 67 is required to close on its bonds by February if we get an extension, and that's the latest that we could have an extension. So if we're talking about if 47, if there's a majority of the board that doesn't want to move forward on 47 and we don't find another partner to make up the share that 47 would not be contributing and the project does not move forward, then it would, and assuming that there's a lot of ifs in this scenario, but assuming that that a corporation vote is successful, and let's set aside the issue of the MUDs and whether they're dissolved or not dissolved, and let's just leave it at a mobility issue and the township having responsibility for roads at that point, or the city of the Woodlands. The city of the Woodlands would have to then either issue just basic tax exempt bonds, or they would have to apply for a separate water development loan approval. They would not be able to stand in the shoes of the MUD 67 approval at that point, because that authorization would have already expired. So just want to make sure that you know what the mechanics are clear to y'all as you consider different scenarios. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah, Brian, this was if I'm not mistaken, it's a drainage issue, right?
This is Brian. That's correct. I mean, that's why we're talking about it at this board meeting. It's because of the drainage issues.
And then, Brian, what was the vote we had at the last meeting? I thought we had put this to rest.
This is Brian. So last month we did have a majority of the board vote to move forward with the project and authorize preparation of the interlocal agreement, with the understanding that the final interlocal agreement would come back to this board as well as all the other boards for final approval before the 67 bond issue would move forward with the water development board. So there is one more bite at the apple, so to speak, by each MUD board to finally approve the legal document for the interlocal agreement.
Right.
Well, I don't want you guys to do the work if so I agree though with Paul. I did think we voted last time, but I appreciated this presentation. I always am interested in flood maps and the like.
Well, I think Donnie did a great job, and I think it's very clarifying for us how important it is for the Woodlands in general, and these customers of ours in specifics to get relief. I did have a sister who lived there, and I remember when she first moved there, and her home went underwater whenever we had these big events. So,
where are the homes in MUD 47 on the map of neighborhood improvements?
if I'm not mistaken, if you go down Shadow Bend off Research Forest.
Oh, that's right, Mark Unland. Somewhere he would benefit from this.
Well, by the way, it's not just Mark. I mean, where I used to live.
All of his neighbors, I just remember him saying that in public open comment that he would benefit from it, and he still wasn't for it.
Well, all the neighborhoods going down to Golden Shadow that I know of will benefit from it. Okay, some more than others, but
yeah. Is that where your sister lived? Is that where they had flooding?
No, my sister lived right across from the opposite the entry to the high school. I forget what the name of that street is.
Yeah, Twinberry, sure.
Right, so the water would go all the way into that first block of houses. If you know the streets there, but also there's significant water that comes into the Shadow Bend area. Okay, all the way down to just short of Lake Woodlands, at least, in the events that I was unfortunately experienced.
Well, I would like us to at least, if anything, if the board's open to it, to at least consider looking at the cost sharing in MUD 47's contribution to the project.
And the one thing that I'm not clear on, and I feel like we covered it last month, and maybe I'm just being a little slow, I don't know, is why the other MUD can have the 0 interest bond and pay this back over 30 years, but we have to be on the hook for the full amount right away.
Yeah, this is Brian. Good question, Jennifer. And so the reason for that is there had to be a project sponsor way back when. And Donnie, I don't know if your group can even tell us when this process first began. It was a while back. And it was a long shot deal whenever the application was submitted. And 67 was the district that said, okay, we'll put up the money from the get-go to process this application and see if it can get approved or not. Had the issues in Capstone and were willing to move forward with the application. And so the Water Development Board considered them to be the sponsor district. And so they are the entity that was approved for the loan. And so that's why only MUD 67 can issue bonds at the 0% interest for the 30-year period. Other district, go ahead.
Ryan, I just had a question. So our resident, he suggested refiling the paperwork and enhancing the quality of the debt risk by having all of the MUDs apply for it and allowing them the 30-year 0 interest participation in the loan as well. Is that not possible, or is that something that could actually be done quickly?
This is Brian. I think that would probably be a new application. Donnie, do you have your grant application or your loan application folks in the meeting to speak to that, who actually processed the paperwork?
I don't think Craig's on the line. I don't know if John, can you answer that question? Do you know?
No, we need to talk to Craig about that to get more details.
But this is Brian. So let's set aside the whether, and I think it's unlikely, but we'll run that to ground that we could do that as part of this application without it having to be a separate application. But even if that were a possibility for MUD 47, we're talking about, we would have to be talking about for MUD 47 revenue bonds, because as you'll recall, y'all used up all of your remaining tax bond authorization with your last bond issue. So what was being proposed, basically, that you issued bonds a year or so ago for drainage rehab. And so those, for a portion of the bond issue, was for drainage channel rehab. So those funds would be used for this bond issue at whatever the financing rate was on that bond issue. And then you also had funds for the 1488 new development project. And I think the recommendation would actually be to use those funds pursuant to a change in use application to the TCEQ to pay for that portion as well. So you would actually not be using any of your operating reserve for this project. You would be using bond funds, because if you went and issued an additional bond issue, it would have to be a revenue bond issue.
Yeah, well, I mean, it doesn't matter.
Okay, that's really helpful to understand.
Yeah, you'd have to have higher water sewer rates is the bottom line to fund the debt service.
So is this something we could have SJRA do, and then all the MUDs could pay for this project?
This is Brian again. That would be a separate application, and I don't know if there's been any discussion about that from the River Authority's perspective to have them
So
pursue an application.
I know last month we voted, I think it was 3-1 on this. Are we being asked to review this because you're asking for more money?
No, it's,
No.
what Brian had stated earlier or previously was my understanding is that we needed authorization to continue pursuing this project.
I thought we
Because
did.
no, we voted yes to, yes, but with the knowledge that we would get more information on what exactly we're paying for here, right?
Okay.
How is our money being spent? And being that this, my concern is this is basically our last little bit of money that we can put on our infrastructure. Is this the best use of that money? Because it's only going to affect, and don't get me wrong, I think this is a great project, but it's only going to affect the people that live on the back of these, two neighborhoods within our very large district.
Yeah, it is a great project, and I think ultimately it will move forward. I would like to wait.
Yeah, I feel like because we have this application deadline, right? I feel like it's an arbitrary deadline, especially considering how much work and how much money we're going to be spending on this. It's frustrating.
But we did vote to move forward on this thing, right? I mean, I thought that's what we did last month.
Our vote was to move forward in the discussions.
I have a quick question. This is Cynthia. This is a lot of information that was presented this evening, and I am not comfortable responding and voting yes, no, or abstaining. When some of these slides, I didn't even have 10, 15 seconds to look at them. Personally, I need more time. And why are we doing this right now? Why do we have to do it now instead of next meeting? That's my big question.
This is Brian. There is no vote being requested today. My recollection of last month, the discussion was that we had a very thorough discussion and some level of differences of opinion, which is certainly the point of having the discussion. And then at the end of the day, the motion was to move forward with the process of participating and preparing the interlocal agreement, and that interlocal agreement would come back to the board for full approval, but also that some number of directors did not feel like they had enough information to be able to provide that final approval at the when we come back, which is not this month, which is to approve the interlocal agreement among all the districts to participate in this project. So the first one was an interim approval to move forward. This board said, okay, we've got some level of difference of opinion on this board. We're willing to keep the process moving forward, but we want a presentation from LJA that gives us a thorough understanding of exactly what the situation is and what is being proposed, as well as the bond issue timeline, which I believe Baird has prepared and Shelley has put on the Google Drive, so y'all can see that. And y'all would receive that information today. No vote would be considered at today's meeting. This would just be to digest, and then we would come back when the interlocal agreement was ready to take a final vote. And so that would be either at September or the October meeting.
Right.
Okay, so to Cynthia's point, then these slides and the report and some of that background information will all be on the Google Drive, so that we'll all have a chance to dive into it a little more than a few minutes at one meeting before the next meeting comes, or before the next actual vote comes up.
Absolutely.
Anthony, one of the comments I would make is that we have been doing improvements for different areas of our mud on a pretty consistent basis. Okay, Donnie could tell you, he's been out in the street, I've been out in the street with him at various times where we have made local improvements. As a matter of fact, a big local improvement was just above where I live now for improved drainage, okay? So that the end of a particular street that was flooding did not, would have that flood mitigation work done, and it eliminated all that flooding. At the bottom of that street, as a matter of fact, in a separate project, we moved about 600-700 yards west to do a similar type project for another cul-de-sac where they would flood in these kinds of events. And so we've been, this isn't an isolated situation where we haven't, as part of our normal duties, if you will, as conservators here, help different areas out by spending money. You look back on the numbers, you can probably find the numbers, but we've been doing this for quite a while.
I recall that, Paul. I remember we put a little letter out to our residents, and it was 1.1 or 2.1 million dollars since Harvey on improving these districts, and it was a sum of 10 little projects that we did. So I do recall that, but that was Mud 47 specific projects. This is 2.2 million, but maybe only 30 homes, right? So it's a little bit different, but I do recall what you're talking about, Paul.
Okay.
This is Cynthia again. I may have missed this, but I was just curious, how long do we project that this will take? If we do go ahead and start this project?
This is Donnie with LJA.
This is Brian. Donnie, do you have that?
I mean, once we get the go ahead, then we've got to do the updated drainage models, and that's going to take anywhere from about 6 months to a year to do those models, because we have to gather data. There's a lot of information has to go in to put those together. Then from that, we need to do in conjunction with that, we can start talking with environmental of what impacts we're going to have. Then we need to put together construction plans that match what the permit is and help the permit and match the model. So we're probably, it's probably from beginning to end, anywhere from like 2 to 3 years.
If we're adopted by the township in the time, then the township will just take over our contracts, I would imagine, right?
This is Brian. That's correct. If the incorporation election is successful and the city council voted to dissolve the districts, then they would, whichever districts they could dissolve all or portion, that's a whole nother discussion, but they would stand in the shoes of any districts that they dissolved and assume all the assets, liabilities, and contractual responsibilities of those dissolved MUDs.
I'd like for them to be the decision makers, given that it will land in their laps.
Well, then get out the vote.
All right. So are there any other questions about this potential project before we move on? Okay, so I'm hearing none. I think that some of us may have more questions when we get to look at more of that data, but we'll move on for now. We'll have opportunity to ask more questions at a further date. We'll go on to, guess we're all the way to number 10, receive the SGRA Woodlands Division report.
Well, good evening, everyone. This is Chris Meeks. I have a couple items, and Ron has one item. Ron, unless you would like to go first.
Nope, go ahead.
All right, so the first item is, some of y'all may have seen social media or just driving past it. Research Forest, the GRP line that goes through that area, there is a valve that has been leaking since last Friday. So tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., we'll be shutting down Research Forest between Technology Forest and New Trails and beginning the repair of that valve. No estimate on timeline, depends on weather, rain. Of course, it's all buried. So when we dig it up, we'll see what's down there and go from there.
It seems like it's in the same spot as the big break not too long ago, is it?
It's in the same area, in between Technology and New Trails, but this one we do not expect to be on the actual main line itself. It appears to be the valve off of it.
Mhm. It's a valve. Okay.
There's 3 valves in that area. One of those 3 are leaking. For the next item, I do have a very brief 1-slide presentation to show on cybersecurity. If you can, let me know when you can see it.
Yep, you can see it.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so since I am talking about cybersecurity, it is going to be high level. I'm not going to use anything specific. That's part of the reason they have me doing it, because I don't know all the intricate details and passwords and stuff. But I'm gonna go through a few different items. The first is, as you see on your screen, active monitoring. This is not only the staff of the River Authority watching for unusual things that are going on, but it's also a lot of different subscriptions, memberships, so on and so forth that we are a part of that constantly send different reminders throughout the days, weeks, months, and years. And the IT department reads every single one of those that comes through, look for patches, look for vulnerabilities, updates our systems immediately, so on and so forth, whatever we can do to stay on top of these items. There's also continuous audits, internal and external audits that are done. Some are by some of the security agencies, some are done internally, but there are continuous audits. Training as well. There's a lot of training, not only for the IT staff on what they're going to recognize, what to look for, what's coming down the path, whatever it may be, also for the staff that utilizes the networks. One thing to point out here, it goes across the board for any one of these items I'm talking about, is essentially we have 2 systems. One is you have the IT system, what we call the business network, the email, the phone system, stuff like that. Then you have the other network, which is the SCADA network, which is the monitoring of the actual operational of the facilities. Those 2 systems are not connected. So if somebody breaks into the business side, that does not mean they have a free road straight into the SCADA side. In fact, the SCADA system has very, very strict restrictions, and I do not know of any computer that actually has internet capabilities, except for one that's maintained by the SCADA programmers themselves. Everything else is not tied to outside networks and is not tied to the business network. This other thing you see here, managed users. This one is not just when you get hired, you get the keys to everything you could possibly imagine. Every user that's added to either network, it's actually critiqued on which systems they're going to have access to. So to give you an example, on the SCADA side, the operations of the facilities, Ron Kelling he may have view only access, but nothing above that. Myself, I actually only have view only at this point at my own request, but no user when they come in automatically gets free reign of everything. Same thing goes on the business side of things. You don't get every software and access to everything if you don't have the need to get in. The last picture we have up here are defenses. And so what I'm talking about there is, of course, you have hardware, you have software such as firewalls and stuff like that. But with the hardware side, there's actually key fobs in some cases that have to be used to access certain networks. There's 2-factor identification or authentication, and a lot of those different things that are done. But I will say all this is we have a lot of subscriptions and memberships to a lot of different agencies. We talk to a lot of people, we stay on top of a lot of things, but that does not mean that, there's not a 13-year-old kid out there somewhere that's, bored and can get in somewhere, some way. So we do have backups, we do have resiliency, and we prepare as best we can, but there's always that off chance that there was somebody that could get into somewhere. So with that, I'll see if you have any questions. If there are none, then I'll turn it over to Mr. Kelly.
Okay, as most of y'all know that I will be retiring from the SJRA, and I got one more PowerPoint presentation left in me. And so next Monday evening at 5 o'clock, we're gonna have Follow the Water, the sequel. If you, some of you may remember about 3 years ago, I did a Follow the Water a workshop. It's 106 slides, 3 hours of riveting discussion about a drop of water going from Lake Conroe through the GRP plant into the woodlands and into your individual homes. And it talks about all the contracts, all the legal aspects, all the dollars associated with each move. So that when you're through with that, you can understand from the time it rains in Lake Conroe to the time it ends up in your tap, how the water goes through, where the dollars are, and where all the contracts are, and who all has their little fingers in all that. So that will be next, next Monday, the 23rd at 5 o'clock. There's also Betty Daughtery is setting up through WWA a 3 separate sessions. They will be at noontime, and I think they're the 7th, the 9th, and the 14th of September. And so if you don't think you can handle sitting through 3 continuous hours of this, then we will have, and the continuous hours on Monday is going to be at our Woodlands Plant 1 facility. The other items, the 1 hour items and during lunchtime on the 7th, 9th, and 14th are Zoom meetings. So I just want to let you know where that, and just following up, I want to thank everybody for your support over the last 14 years and moving on. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Well, thank you for all your service, Ron. I was wondering on the Zoom meetings, so you won't be doing those, right?
Yes.
Oh, you will?
I actually, my official retirement date is the 8th of October, but I actually start teaching freshman engineers at Blinn College in Brenham how to become an engineer. And I've got a month's worth of vacation time, so I'm actually coming back for those 3 dates to do these presentations.
Oh, beautiful. Wow. Well, thank you.
Good stuff.
So that's all we had. Again, thanks for all your support.
And I was on the line. Did you talk about the public presentation you're going to make? So that's coming out.
The one on the 24th is just for the directors. The 3 that are during lunch are going to be for the public.
And they'll be Zoom.
And they'll be Zoom, right?
Well, awesome, Ron. Congratulations on your retirement. And thank you for this presentation and those future ones. And for teaching those engineers that we need.
We'll see if they stay in engineering after I get a hold of them.
So you're going to come to the GMA 14 meeting too, eh?
Yes, actually, yes.
Good times.
Well, thank you, Ron.
Thanks.
And we'll move on to number 11, receive the attorney's report.
This is Brian. Thank you, Anthony. I'll try to keep it brief. I know we're running pretty long tonight. You've got a memo in your board file regarding House Bill 1154. That is a bill that goes into effect starting on September the 1st. Kind of cut to the chase on that one. Your Woodlands Water staff actually has a over and above compliance website for each of the Woodlands districts. So you actually already meet the compliance requirements and have been meeting the compliance requirements of this new statute, even before it was introduced, much less passed by the legislature. So there is nothing additional that you need to do to comply with House Bill 1194. You're already doing it. So that's good news. Also, under the attorney's report, have been reporting to boards that have been getting some questions about how meetings will be conducted after September the 1st. We've talked about the governor lifting the disaster proclamation that allows for meetings to be held remotely starting on September the 1st. There have been questions about, can you have some directors meet in person and other directors participate by conference call or through Zoom? And we've had that question not just in the Woodlands, but a number of our district clients throughout the area. And so we have internally done research on that and had an internal memo for the firm prepared. And we had a discussion about that at one of our semi-monthly attorney meetings on Monday. And the answer, unfortunately, under the Open Meetings Act is there is no provision in there that allows for that sort of remote participation outside of an emergency. And if it is due to an emergency, the only items that you can consider in that emergency meeting are the items that are giving rise to the emergency. So you could not have, for instance, 3 directors show up in person and then 2 directors call in, or 2 directors in person and 3 directors call in. If you had 2 directors show up, you wouldn't have a quorum, so your meeting would be remote, and you couldn't meet remotely because you wouldn't have the disaster proclamation in place. And that's for telephone conference calls, and that's for directors or consultants. There is and has been for several years now, and I think we talked about this a month or so ago, the provision that allows for a video conference meeting if you have 3 directors present and 2 would be remote if you meet a number of requirements of that statute. Currently, we don't have the technology in place at Woodlands Water to do that. There has been some discussion at the trustee level about receiving some proposals for possibly acquiring that technology. There's a good bit of I think discussion still to be had there. I don't think there's a consensus as to whether that's going to be done or not at this point. But you'll see in the trustees write-up that the trustees did go ahead and request for there to be a couple of bids on that. So that's something to keep in mind as we go forward, that we will have to meet in person unless the district looks to avail itself of that video option in the future when we have the technology to be able to do so. So that's all I have of a general nature of the under the attorney's report. Happy to answer questions if you have them. I also need to briefly go through items 12 and 13 after we conclude the attorney's report.
So what you just said about us having technology at Woodlands Water, if we had that technology, we could continue meeting remotely? Is that what you said?
This is Brian. So you would have to have, under that provision of the Open Meetings Act, you would have to have 3 members in person at the posted meeting location. That's what the statute requires. You would have to have two-way communication, audio, visual, and the other 2 directors would be able to participate remotely, but you would have to have 3 in person at the meeting location. You could not do what we're doing this evening, which is all 5 directors remote.
Okay, so we could distance more, because the trustee board meeting was, of course, SRO, and we've got tent hospitals, and breakthrough cases are very common in my household. So this is going to be an interesting time in September. We'll be further down the pike of having more variants that do what we don't know, and we're pretty much having to meet in person. This is interesting life we're living in. That's all.
Understood. And unfortunately, the governor actually had a breakthrough case today, if y'all seen that in the news.
Hey, Brian. So even if all of the directors have to be there, that's fine. Are we able to still offer a Zoom meeting for our residents so that they can have higher accessibility, so that they can hear and see what's going on and ask questions at the beginning of the meeting? Because I think that would be great to have long-term, no matter what happens with COVID.
Right on. Mhm.
This is Brian. So we could set up an option where folks could remotely listen in. But I think the township may do that right now, and some other entities may be doing that now as well, but not participate remotely. They would still, if they wanted to make comments, would come to the board meeting, but they would be able to watch or listen to the meeting remotely, depending on technology availability.
Yeah, the township had us call in and we were able to make comment back when the pandemic was bad from our homes.
Correct, and that's because of the suspension of the in-person meeting requirements under the governor's proclamation.
Okay. Well,
Brian, I don't think there are any further questions. If you want to dive into the financial policy and the developed district.
This is Brian. Thank you, Anthony. So item number 12 is an administrative housekeeping item. As you know, the district is required to conduct an annual review of its investment policy pursuant to the Public Funds Investment Act. Our firm conducts that review on behalf of all of our district clients and makes recommendations as necessary for any amendments to the district's investment policy. We do have some minor administrative revisions for the investment policy this year that are summarized in a memo on pages 53 to 55 of your packet. So we do recommend that the board adopt the resolution evidencing that this year's annual review of the investment policy has been completed and that the amended investment policy has been adopted to incorporate those administrative revisions. And we do need a motion on that.
I'll move that we pass that.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Jennifer. Paul, how do you vote?
Aye.
Cynthia?
Aye.
And I'll vote aye, so motion carries.
Okay, thank you, board. The next item, I think we've already somewhat covered under the discussion about the budget, the district's developed status. You are still categorized as a developing district. We had this on the agenda last month and deferred. LGA was working on the certificate. We do have that on pages 58 through 61, and that does evidence that you are still a developing district. So we do need to adopt the resolution on page 56 for the tax year 2021. Again, this is an annual exercise that we have to do as a result of Senate Bill 2 that was passed in the 2019 session. So this status can change year to year and can go in either direction, from developed to developing or developed or developing to developed. So it's not a one-time designation.
I move that we approve Donnie's developing district letter.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Cynthia. Paul, how do you vote?
Aye.
Jennifer?
Aye.
All right, vote aye, motion carries.
This is Brian. Thank you. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Brian. So it looks like we're on item number 14, receive update on proposed FM 1488 development project.
This is Brian. I did hear from Dan that he, I think he had an issue with his login this evening, and was still going to wait till he had an opportunity to visit with the board in person, since this meeting got moved back to remote.
Right.
Okay, so we'll move on then to number 16. Consider an act on a change order to the AMI performance contract.
If you have been following the trustee summaries and the general manager's reports for the last several months, you'll recall that I've talked quite a bit about a couple of AMI polls that have caused some concern with a couple of residents. And we were looking at options to address those concerns. We did find, actually it was the Woodlands Township Park sites that we could relocate the poles to. There's a rather expensive cost associated with that. We did have this as an action item tonight. Well, first of all, I think Brian Yates had reported that this would technically be borne by the MUD where the pole is going to be relocated. It would be their expense. We had a request from MUD 36 director to share that expense in a ratio that was similar to the way they were put in. And that's what you're seeing in your packet. But during the meetings, I've discovered that a lot of our directors really had not gone out to see what this looked like in the field. And so if you haven't done that, I would recommend that you maybe defer this until you've actually had a chance to see what it looks like in the field. So that's my brief introduction on this topic.
The financials in MUD 36 are kind of tight. As a matter of fact, midway through this year, MUD 36 had to increase their water bills because of budget constraints. So, you know, if this were MUD 47 and we had an uproar, we'd be able to do something, which is probably why people keep knocking on our door for funding. But that's the situation with MUD 36. They need the money to do this.
Right. My assumption would be that these this system was designed where you would put the poles where they'd be most effective.
Good point.
That's exactly what we did.
This is where they have the most coverage. The other locations, they drop in coverage. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
well, they were put where they are the most effective, where we didn't have to buy property, where we had property that we could utilize legally and without breaking any covenant restrictions.
So effective and efficient as far as we could with our tax dollars.
And we were getting about 98% coverage.
Okay, so so it looks like we've got two options. We can vote yay, or three, yay, nay, or defer to next meeting. I'm gonna just go ahead and make a movement, a motion that we say no on this relocation.
I'll second that.
Okay, Paul, how do you vote?
No.
Okay, no. Okay, so no as in not relocating. I'm sorry, no against the money, or no, you're not voting the same as Laura and I.
No, not on no to relocation, which I presume means no on the money.
Thank you for asking. Yeah, because I
Yeah, just want to make sure we're clear on what we're voting here. Jennifer?
I agree that we should not spend that money.
Okay, and Cynthia?
No to the relocation.
All right, thank you all. So that the vote no on that carries, and we will move on to number 17, receive the general manager's report.
Few items to highlight from the trustee meeting. We did review the Woodlands Water Agency trustee budget. Again, it was a draft budget presented to stimulate some discussion. We'll be coming back in September with a full recommendation. I did report kind of an interesting phone call I'd received from a Rice University grad student that is going to do a study on how subsidence may impact drainage in the Bear Branch and Panther Branch drainage basins. So we'll see how that plays out.
How
and
timely.
Yeah. And I did report, for those that didn't know, that Lisa Gonzalez with Hart has resigned. They have named a replacement. I don't think I got that press release in the packets. We had a discussion about audio video capabilities, and we'll be discussing that more at the next meeting. I didn't put in my summary, but I want to emphasize that we did pass the resolution to go to the San Jacinto River Authority Board supporting continuing to secure water from the Trinity River Authority for the time being.
You know, one of the things that came up in the trustee board meeting, well, I asked about the One Water website, and I was watching the township meeting yesterday at 8:30 a.m. and they brought it up as well to confirm that that $30,000 from the township was out the door. So I think we're in it for 27 grand, Mud 386 for 3 grand, and the township for 30. Last I heard, Bill Bass had procured the domain names, but I haven't heard any update on that, how that website's coming on. So I hope it's beyond the ILA discussions. And so an update on that.
I did get comments from our legal team today or yesterday on that. So I hopefully, I haven't had a chance to review them, but I hope they're non-substantive and we can get that executed.
Wow. So it really, they have not started working on that yet. Wow. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
So Jim, before you go, who's doing the notification on this leak or disruption that's going to happen on Research Forest? Is your organization doing that, or is somebody else doing that to the public?
It is the San Jacinto River Authority is doing public notices that we're helping push out.
Okay, great.
I got it several times this evening in different directions. All right, well, my
one more thing, I am about to receive an email, an update from the San Jacinto River Authority on the dam modifications, the dam repairs, that I'll send out to the presidents of the MUDs that are involved in that and see about having a special meeting. After you get this detailed update where they are and what their plan is, you can see if you think we need to meet separately before the next month's meeting.
Yeah,
I think they're gonna start the coring in early September.
I don't remember who said it, but at the beginning of the meeting, they were talking about having someone from each MUD be kind of a stakeholder for the dam. So, okay. All right, well, the trustees report is next, and we've really hit it all. So I won't add any more, but I did attend double masked, and I hope the rest of the trustees are A-okay and healthy. That's it.
Thank you, Laura. Now, number 19, recess to closed session. This is a new kind of standard item, right? Just in case. I'm
This
not
is
aware.
Brian, that's correct. No need to go into closed session today. We're just going to have it as a standing item going forward in case we need it.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So that takes her 19 and 20. So 21, discuss any matters for placement on future agenda. Was there anything that a board member wanted to be put on the agenda for next month?
We need less on our.
This is Brian. Is there any interest in having further discussion about possible video conference meetings for this board? It sounded like there is some discussion there.
It's cheap.
I like the idea of making this more available to the public. You know, that way Arthur can drop in no matter where he's at, right? If he's in Saudi Arabia or wherever he goes in his global travels, or, you know, Mark doesn't have to get rained on a rainy day. But I like having that option because there are health risks right now, and there's always going to be that person that has some sort of health issue, whether or not there's a pandemic. So I'm interested in pursuing that route, but I don't know, whatever the WWA decides to do that available. Once they decide what route they'll take, we can come together as a board and approve it if we, as a group, want to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, I will, at the trustee level there, promote more public meetings and the technology to achieve that. Excuse me. Still have a shortness of breath from the Rona.
And I'm aware of a few tools that we're using on the business side. I'll send that info to you, Laura, and to you as well, Jim. Okay, so not hearing anything else, I move to adjourn.
All right, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks everyone.
Thank y'all.
Laura, feel better soon.
Good night.
Thanks, I'm good.